Hello, welcome to Lecture 2. This is going to be following Chapter 2 of the book. All of my lectures follow the chapters that I have posted. This is what kind of day this has been. So, this is going to be interesting for all of us. This is not bad. Former student from last semester bought me this for my birthday, along with some other things, but it was really sweet of them. And I am going to drink this while I lecture. We'll see how this goes. There's a first time for everything, and this is definitely the first time. It's been a crap day. So, what else are you going to do on a Friday night, right? It's actually pretty good for a cheap bread. I'll take it. Okay. I'll let this do its magic. Philosophers corrupting the youth since 800 BCE. All right, so one more. I need a little hat with a wine bottle on each side and some straws. Guys, this year has just... I don't usually drink by myself, but this year, oh God. Sipping, I'm remembering to sip. Okay, let's talk about philosophy, shall we? This is going to end up being like, I don't know if any of you are Jewish, but this is going to end up being like a Seder. Going to drink my 4 glasses of wine, and then I'm going to start singing Jewish drinking songs while talking about slavery and no more slavery and plagues. It's going to be so much fun. All right, let's talk about morality. Okay, so get a little toasty in here. Oh. Actually, I'm just... Okay, let's do this. All right, so last time we talked about the philosophical method, and we talked about processes of reasoning that use premises and conclusions, okay? We're going to use that process of reasoning in this class. Hopefully we're going to be really good at it by the end. It will change your life. I feel like I ought to do an infomercial here for some wine and some philosophy, and it'll change your life. All right, so... the premises are going to always provide evidence for the conclusion. So if somebody makes a claim that you find somewhat questionable, right? Here's a claim that I heard recently. Ted Cruz apparently got on Twitter and voiced his opinion about pregnancy. And he said that pregnancy is not a life-threatening condition. And boy, did that raise the hackles, right? Pregnancy very well can be a life-threatening condition for some people. It's not a walk in the park. The maternal mortality rate is actually pretty high, and it's especially high in countries where they don't have very good medical care or health insurance. But anyway, so here's a claim. He made this claim that pregnancy is not a life-threatening condition. Okay, well, what are his reasons for that? I don't know. He didn't provide them. But I have an issue with this claim. So I'm not going to just say, well, fuck your claim, right? You're just an idiot. Oh, well, it's Twitter. You could do that, but that's not what we're going to do in this class. So so on Twitter, you can say whatever you want. But here, what we're going to do is we'd look at that and we'd say, okay, Ted Cruz has a very misinformed idea of women's health. And then we would probably want to look at whatever his evidence is for that premise, if he's even got any evidence. So you would have to have something like statistics, right? So you'd have to have some statistical regularities to back that up. So a certain percentage of women have absolutely no life-threatening complications from pregnancy, and that number is, I don't know what that number is going to be, honestly. That's something you can't just pull out of thin air. That's something that you have to actually go and look at empirical data to find out, right? So you have to go and find descriptive claims to help you know whether or not, so your premises for that conclusion are going to be descriptive claims about, got my music on, sorry. It's going to be descriptive claims about women's health, right? So this is empirical data. This is something that scientists have gathered, right? So we're going to go out and we're going to figure out what percentage of women in the United States, and presumably he just meant the United States, I don't know, but we'll just quantify it that way. There's a certain percentage of women in the United States who have 0 complications from pregnancy. Okay, what percentage is that? And then we want to also look at what is the percentage of women who've had serious complications. And we also want to know what's the percentage of women for whom pregnancy has been life-threatening. And then we might also want to know what's the percentage of women for whom pregnancy would be life-threatening were they to get pregnant, all right? So they don't have to actually get pregnant to know whether or not it would be life-threatening. Some people have conditions such that it would be at the end of them if they were to become pregnant. So they take strict precautions not to become pregnant. Okay, so that's how we want to engage with that claim if we're philosophers. If we're on Twitter, you can say whatever you want about Ted Cruz. I really don't care. But if we're in a class or we're in a philosophical dialogue, we're going to engage with the evidence. So he didn't provide any. I outlined the kind of evidence that you would have to provide, and then we would have to go and look, say, is this good data? Now, not every bit of scientific information that you read is good data. And here's another thing. When you look at research that's been reported in the news, right? So magazines, newspapers, they oftentimes misreport scientific results because they want them to sound sensational, and so they interpret the original work a little more sensational in a sensational way when they really shouldn't. So they're misreporting the scientific facts. So you have to be really careful about that. But that's where you're going to go to look at what is the actual evidence for this claim, how good is this claim. And it might apply to a certain number of cases, and it probably does. Maybe even some majority of cases, I really don't know. But you can't make that claim unless you know, right? So here's the thing. So I don't know that information, and I have a pretty vast education. In fact, I was going to be a doctor, and then I decided I didn't want to do that. So I have some medical background, but I have no idea what the statistics are in that, and I kind of suspect that Ted Cruz doesn't have that information either. So I'm going to say, look, Ted, as a philosopher, I'm going to say that I find your conclusion, or I find your statement to be objectionable. I would like to see some evidence, so give me an argument for that conclusion. And here's how I think you would have to do it. You would have to go and you would have to get quality scientific data, and you're probably going to have to look at original articles. You're going to have to go to the primary sources instead of just sort of filtering through news articles. So unless you've done that, I'm not going to take you very seriously. And you're justified in doing that, okay? So if somebody doesn't provide any evidence, you don't have to listen to what they say. You don't have to accept it as truth. Now, if he were to actually do that work, which most politicians don't, they just say things that appeal to their base. But if he were to actually do the work and provide the statistics, then you could check the statistics, right? You could really look at how good is this argument. Maybe it is a really good argument. Maybe it's convincing, but unless he actually does the work, you'll never know. And you're not required rationally. In fact, rationally, you ought to reject that claim unless you can see what your evidence is. Okay, so this is the philosophical method. And we're really interested in the truth of claims, right? And remember, last time we talked about different kinds of claims. So you've got normative claims and you've got descriptive claims. And the way that we verify the truth of those claims is going to be different because they're different kinds of claims, right? So descriptive claims, we're going to go out and we're going to investigate the world. We're going to see what scientists have to say about it. So we don't actually personally have to go out and do research in order to verify a claim. We just have to find some reliable research that's already been done, right? So that's what science does for us. It does the work for us and makes the data available. Okay, but that's still empirical. I mean, if we were to go out and examine the world, we would be able to come up with the empirical data if we did it in an appropriate way. There are appropriate methods for doing research, and some people don't follow them, right? So you have to be careful. I'm starting to feel a little bit better. Less sad, a little more happy. Happiness in a bottle. Sometimes I'll take it because sometimes that's all you can get. All right. So this week, this chapter is related, of course, to chapter 1. And it's related to chapter 1 because what it does is it's going to narrow our focus just to the normative domain, right? The normative domain is still pretty broad, though. because moral claims are just one type of normative claim. There are lots and lots and lots of normative domains. There's etiquette, there's law, there's rules of games, there's on and on and on and on and on, right? Social norms, blah, 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 religious norms, okay? That's all part of the normative domain. Morality is still just a subset of that domain, and that's what we're going to focus on. So we're narrowing ourselves down to normative, moral, okay? So in this chapter, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about three different ways to interpret what makes moral normative claims true. Okay? So truth is grounded in something. It's grounded in some form of reality, right? So a claim, if it's true, that means that it accurately represents some form of reality. And there are three different ways to look at this, and we're going to go through those three theories. Those are three categories I think most, well, I would say most moral theories are going to fall under one of these three categories. And then we're going to choose one of these as the better option. And we're not just going to say, well, we like this theory the best because it sounds nice, and so we're going to accept it. What we're going to do is we're going to look at what is the theory, what's an argument for the theory, and what are some problems with that argument. This is just the process that we go through in philosophy, so that's what we're going to do. All right, so I'm going to just dig right in after I drink some wine. This is my first glass. All right. Okay, so broad categories of moral theory. Now, because I'm going to be going through some detailed arguments, and I'm going to be going through some detailed arguments that are not in the book, it's a really good idea for you to pause this. If you don't already have your outline, your lecture outline in front of you, you're probably going to want to follow it for this one. Because I don't have any way to write on a board, which, God, I wish I did. So I would normally, write the stuff on the board and interact with you, and that would make my life so much better because, yay, students are awesome and whatever. But here we are. We're a diseased nation. So I'm going to drink wine, and you're going to follow an outline. Okay, this is going to be so much fun. Please make sure you vote in November. Okay, broad categories of moral theory. Here we go. Good. So there are the three that we're going to talk about in this chapter are objectivism, subjectivism, and relativism. Now, two of those terms, you're probably going to remember that we talked about something that sounded sort of like that last time, right? Objective and subjective. So if you recall, what makes a claim objective is that the truth of that claim, remember, we're still talking about truth. The truth of an objective claim does not depend on what anyone or any group of people wants, thinks, believes, any mental state at all, right? Whatever mental state you can conjure in your head, feelings, beliefs, desires, seemings, whatever kind of attitudes and things that you can conjure in your mind. The truth of an objective claim does not depend on any of that, right? And it doesn't depend on what any group of people want or think is the case. Okay, so truth is objective, and for objective claims, this is what we say when we talk about objective truth. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about certain claims are objectively true because they don't depend on what anybody else thinks. All right, so that's objectivism. Then it's just going to be the thesis, right? A thesis is just a statement of a theory that moral claims are objectively true. That's it. Right? Moral claims are true independent of what anyone thinks, believes, desires, or feels. I gotta keep... Sorry, I want to curse my MacBook. That would be a bad idea because I have to finish my dissertation this semester. Which is part of the reason why I'm sad. Okay, so objectivism, moral claims are objectively true. That means they don't depend on what anybody thinks. Subjectivism, well, if a claim is subjectively true, that means that it does depend on some kind of mental states, right? So subjectivism is just the thesis that moral claims are subjectively true. In other words, that the truth of a moral claim depends on what a given individual or a community of individuals. But in this case, we'll talk about intersubjectivity, but subjectivism is just a claim about what a given individual thinks, believes, desires, feels. Okay? So let me come up with an example of each of these. So it's wrong to torture puppies. Most of us are going to think that that's just objectively true. Most of us are going to think, okay, it is just wrong to torture puppies for pleasure, right? And that's true regardless of whether you want to torture puppies or whether you enjoy torturing puppies or whether you think that puppies are just inanimate objects, right? Whatever you think or believe is irrelevant. It's just a fact that torturing puppies is wrong. That's an objectivist claim. Subjectivism would be, well, torturing puppies is only wrong if you think it's wrong, or if you want it to be wrong, or if it makes you feel bad, right? So a subjectivist is just going to say, look, if something makes you feel bad, then you can count it as morally wrong because it makes you feel a certain way. Okay. We'll get into some discussion about some problems with subjectivism, and we'll get into the arguments for each of these. Okay, so that's objectivism and subjectivism. And then the final one is relativism, okay? Relativism is just the claim that moral claims, it says moral clams. I would like to eat some moral clams right now. So non-kosher. Moral claims are subjectively true, but the relevant subjectivity is cultural rather than individual. So that means that the truth of a moral claim depends on what a given society thinks, believes, desires, feels, etc. So moral claims are only wrong for your society. They're not wrong for anybody else. So if torturing puppies is just part of your culture, and everybody in your culture thinks that it's okay, then it's morally okay. This is relativism. But if some other culture thinks torturing puppies is wrong, fine. Then they think what they say is true, right? So it's not that in one culture where we think torturing puppies is okay that we're wrong. We're right. Torturing puppies is okay. That's a true statement. It's morally acceptable to torture puppies. That's a true statement in this culture. In this culture, where people say, no, absolutely not, torturing puppies is morally wrong, they're also saying something true. It is true in that culture. So claims are indexed to a culture. The truth of a claim depends on which culture you're in. That's relativism. Objectivism, it doesn't matter which culture you're in. Torturing puppies is either right or it's wrong. Period. It doesn't matter what you think. It is objectively true or false, right? That torturing puppies is wrong. Subjectivism is just whatever any individual thinks. So I can think that torturing puppies is wrong, and if I say torturing puppies is wrong, I'm saying something true. I am uttering a fact, a moral fact. And if you say, no, torturing puppies is perfectly acceptable morally, you're also saying a true thing. You're uttering a moral fact, and we can be in the same society. So subjectivism is basically the idea that moral standards are just individual. Whatever you think is true morally, then that's what's true. So we're going to get into some implications of each of these views so that you can see how some of it just goes way off the rails, right? So some of this stuff, even philosophers are not even willing to defend. Like, there are philosophers out there who will defend any view, right? You give them a view, no matter how counterintuitive it seems, no matter how weird it seems, they're going to defend it, right? So there's a guy out there who defends the thesis that it's better for you to have never been born. You're better off if you had never been born. Like, being born is a harm to you. It's a moral harm to you. It's a terrible thing that you were born. He argues for this. It's called antinatalism, right? So, God, more bugs. This time they're after me because I'm so hot. I don't know what it is. Because whatever. Because I'm on camera, and this shit has to happen while I'm on camera because that's my life. That's 2020. That's the shit show. I had to start each of one of my lectures with, welcome to the shit show. All right. So we've got objectivism, subjectivism, and relativism. Now, implications. Let's talk about some of the implications of each of these views before we get into the arguments. Let's start with objectivism because it's at the top of the page. What are some implications of objectivism? Well, one really important implication is that there's exactly one set of moral truths. That's it. There can only be one set of moral truths. We may or may not know what that set of moral truths is, but there is exactly one set of moral truths. And if there's exactly one set of moral truths, then if we disagree about the truth value of a claim, right? So if I say torturing puppies is wrong and you say no, torturing puppies is not wrong, and when I say wrong, I mean morally wrong, one of us is wrong. According to objectivism, one of us has to be wrong. Either torturing puppies is right, morally right, or it's morally wrong. If you choose the wrong one, you're fucked, right? So there's exactly one set of moral truths that is true for everyone, at every time, and every place. That also means that historically, people who are doing things historically that we would not do today, if we count those things as morally wrong today, they were morally wrong then. So slavery, chattel slavery in the United States, morally wrong. Okay, that's something that most people are going to say is just objectively the case. It's objectively true that chattel slavery in the United States is morally wrong. If it's morally wrong today, then it was morally wrong then. If objectivism is true, then the truth values of these claims don't change over time. People might make moral progress. Okay, so moral progress is possible. If objectivism is true, then people are in the process of discovering what the moral truths are. They don't already know what they all are, right? So there's a process by which people have to discover what those moral truths are. And this often is going to happen collectively because we're influenced by the other people in our society. So way back when we had chattel slavery, which really wasn't that long ago, people thought it was morally acceptable, and they found ways to make it morally acceptable by dehumanizing the slaves, right? They're like, oh, they're not human. There's a lot of ways in which they're just animals, so we can treat them like animals. Okay, well, that's bullshit, right? There's no good argument for that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of philosophers, very famous philosophers, who've tried to argue for that shit. It doesn't work, right? You have to do mental gymnastics to try to justify that bullshit. You're never going to do it, right? So, I'm going to start preaching here. I have one glass of wine and suddenly I'm fiery. It's like I'm a Baptist preacher. Somebody say hallelujah. All right. So if it's objectively true, then it's true for all people, in all places, at all times. Okay? That's an implication of the view. And here's another thing. This is important. So I've got, again, this is on your outline, so you don't have to remember exactly everything that I'm saying, but hopefully this will help clarify what I've got written down here and make it a little bit more concrete for you. People who know moral truths, right? So those of us, we may not have all of the moral truths figured out yet. It's like science, right? So this view, objectivism, is kind of like science. We don't have the whole universe figured out yet. We are far, far, far from having a complete physics. Okay, you talk to any physicist and they're going to say, yeah, it would be nice to have a theory of everything, but we are so far from having that. That's what we're aiming for, though. We want to have a complete explanation of the universe. They've got high hopes, right? That's a really ambitious project. And they may never accomplish it in their lifetimes, but they're going to try. And God bless them for trying, right? But morality is the same way. Those of us who study morality, we have the same high hopes, right? We want to have... we want to know what the set of moral truths is. And I suspect, to be perfectly honest, I suspect we'll never know what that set of moral truths is unless we have interactions with other intelligent beings from other places, right? So we've proven that we're not very good at it on Earth. We still haven't figured out what the moral truths are with respect to our relationship to our own environment. You put aliens out there, you put intelligent species in our environment, and we're probably going to fail miserably because we have a history of doing this, because humans are basically stupid. But I just suspect that human beings might go extinct before we figure out what this total set of moral truths is. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? So we're like physicists. We're going to go out and we're going to keep trying because we've got high hopes, right? We want to make the world a better place. We believe in moral progress. Okay, so the people, but there's clearly going to be some moral truths that we do already know. Like, we know that chattel slavery is morally wrong, okay? If you want to argue that it's not, you present me with a good argument and I will wipe the floor with your ass, okay? Fight me. That's basically a challenge. I'm like, I will wipe the floor with your ass. All right. The wine is starting to kick in. I'm getting really aggressive. I'm like, all right, let's bar fight now. You give me a really good argument for chattel slavery and I will kick your ass. There is no good argument for chattel slavery. I mean, that's the point. Wiping the floor with your ass is just implies that there's no good argument for it. So we know that chattel slavery is wrong. So we know some moral truths. And for those of us who know these moral truths, objectivism, this moral theory of objectivism, it entails that we have, or entails the same thing, we can criticize people who don't have the moral truths, right? So if other societies, if there are still societies, and there are still societies in the not in the United States, God, probably there are actually because there's sex slaves, but there are societies around the world where there are still people who are in slavery, various forms of slavery. Now, it doesn't look exactly like the kind of slavery that was here in the United States, but it's a type of slavery. And I'm sorry, slavery is just wrong. When you're dealing with human beings, slavery is just, you might even think slavery of animals is wrong. But there's a good argument for that. So we have the right to criticize. Morally speaking, we are justified in criticizing those societies and saying, look, what you're doing is morally wrong. And we can even intervene if it comes to that. We like to think that the United States intervened in World War II because of these sort of moral atrocities that were happening, that we were justified in criticizing the Nazis for, basically exterminating a whole bunch of people. That's not really why we got into the war. It would be nice to think that that's why we got into the war. But if it was, okay, if that was why we jumped into World War II, we would be perfectly morally justified in doing that, according to objectivism. Because what the Nazis were doing was morally wrong. Genocide is wrong, right? Okay. Those are implications of objectivism. Now, what I want to do, even though I've sort of made the outline a little bit different than the way that I'm presenting a lecture, you should still be able to follow it because all you have to do is scroll. While we're on objectivism, I wanted to go through what the thesis is, what the implications are, and then the argument for objectivism, right? So the book doesn't provide any argument for objectivism. They just say, well, here's subjectivism, which is crazy. Here's relativism, and here's a serious fatal flaw with relativism. Everybody who studies philosophy, moral philosophy, knows that relativism is bullshit because it's got a fatal flaw, which we'll look at. And then they just say, so if it's not subjectivism and it's not relativism, then whoop, it must be objectivism. It's like, well, you still need to provide an argument for it, right? I still think that we need to provide an argument for it if we're going to accept that view, which the authors of the text do accept that objectivism is true. So let's look at that argument. Okay, so I have an argument here. I just came up with this argument for objectivism. And I have a caveat here. And I say the argument below is not a direct argument for objectivism because such arguments are too complex for this course. They are too complex for this course. This is the theory that I'm working on for my PhD thesis is an objectivist theory. And I've studied this for many years, and the arguments are way too complicated for an intro-level ethics course. So I'm just not going to burden you with that. It gets into the weeds like so fast you would be lost. So rather than presenting you with a direct argument for the truth of objectivism, I've said this is an argument for why we may treat objectivism as if it is true. Okay, so arguing that we can treat objectivism as if it's true is different than arguing directly that objectivism is in fact true. Okay, so this is justifying our behavior. This is not justifying necessarily the truth of the thesis. And as it turns out, this is probably good enough for the purposes of this class, and it's good enough for the purposes of this book. Okay, because if you've read all the way through chapter 2 by now, you'll see at the end they're like, oh, we think objectivism is true, and we're going to assume objectivism is true for the rest of this book. Okay, well, so I've created an argument that justifies that move, even though they didn't provide one. So now I also say here, you can just read right along with me because I have provided this for you because I'm a good teacher. Tell me I'm a good teacher. Somebody tell me I'm good. I really need to hear that today. See, this is why I really miss lecturing in person, because I actually love students. I love engaging with students because you all are the best. If you want to email me, please do, because it's lonely out here. It's like I have students in the ether somewhere and I can't talk to them, and it's so sad. Okay, so I'm going to get a flood of emails now, and it's going to make my day. All right, so let's look at this argument. Now, pull it up on your sheet because it's not going to make sense to you if I just say it. Premise 1. We take it for granted that the empirical facts we rely on in our daily activities are objectively true. Okay, now let's just look at that one premise. We're going to analyze every fucking thing here. So, we take it for granted that the empirical facts we rely on in our daily activities are objectively true. Think about this. Do you ever stop to think, oh, is that really a car coming? Or am I hallucinating? No. If you're going to cross the street, you look, you see something, you're like, okay, that's a car, I'm going to wait. You don't ever second guess that. The way we navigate the world every day is we just take it for granted that the information that's coming through our senses, the data that we need to navigate through life is accurate. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it turns out that it's not. But for the most part, our sensory information that comes into us in normal conditions is really accurate, and we just take it for granted that that's true. So that's premise 1. You're probably wondering at this point, how are you going from empirical to the moral? I'm clever. Okay, so we take it for granted that the empirical facts we rely on in our daily activities are objectively true. Premise 2. We treat empirical facts as objectively true because we are confident in our ability to detect empirical facts. We're confident of our ability. We're so confident of our ability that you get a bunch of people who witness the same thing and they'll all bicker about what they saw. Now, okay, so when you're talking about unusual circumstances, and violent crimes are unusual circumstances, okay? So it's known. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, so it's known that eyewitness testimony is really shitty. But it's really shitty because when you have a traumatic event that's unexpected, different parts of the brain go bing, they turn on, and shit goes crazy in there, right? So it's completely different. Your sensory data is processed differently, it's obtained differently, and it's processed differently than if you're just walking down the street and you see like a car go by and you're like, wow, that's a sexy car. I don't know if I'm the only one who does that, but I do. I lust after cars. So if you're just walking down the street and you see a sexy car and you're like, that is a damn fine automobile, right? I don't care about the person driving it. I just care about the car. Look at that back end. Ooh, look at those pipes. I like pipes. My car has pipes. Okay, so this is me lecturing on half a glass of wine. I'm a total lightweight. Okay, so, oh no, come on. Don't do poo-poo stuff, computer. Okay. So, I start talking about the back ends of cars like I'm talking about, booty. It is booty. And in fact, in Britain, it is the boot. Okay, so I can't believe you guys put up with me. This is great. Excuse me. This is making me itch. Okay, so the point is that eyewitness testimony is terrible because of the conditions under which people are getting that information, right? So you talk to 5 different people who witnessed a car accident, and you're going to get 5 different stories about what happened, right? That's just the nature of those kinds of events, right? But just walking down the street every day, our sensory information is coming in a normal way. We're processing it in a normal way, and we take it for granted that it's accurate. And we take it for granted so much. This was the point that I was trying to make about eyewitness testimony, is that we are so confident in our ability to detect the empirical data that we argue with each other about what's true, right? So if 5 different people witness a car accident and you get 5 different stories, every single person has to be like, well, the rest of them all, they're wrong, right? So whatever they're saying, those people have no idea what happened. I know what happened. I trust my senses, right? So we are extremely confident. And we have reason to be extremely confident, right? Most of the time, our senses do us good, right? I really want to kill that bug. Oh, it's probably the same one that was harassing me the other night. It's because I got a light. I got a new light. It's like, woo. Okay, the bug, not the light. Well, that too. Okay, so premise 1, premise 2. Oh my God, I have premise 2 written. I have P2 written down twice. This is actually premise 3. I probably ought to do a better job of proofing things before I post them. Actually, I should probably just fix these and repost it, because not one of you is going to download this before I have it. I'm just going to fix it. And then you will not know unless you watch this video. And then I can have a quiz question that says, did I have typos in the original? Okay, so premise 3. We also take it for granted that the moral facts that we rely on in our daily activities are objectively true. Okay, so I'm drawing an analogy. This is an argument from analogy. I'm drawing an analogy between our ability to detect the empirical facts and our ability to detect the moral facts. We take it for granted that we're good at detecting the empirical facts, and in fact, we really are. Just for navigating everyday activities, we're pretty good at it. And then you can specially train your brain to be really good at it under certain different conditions, right? So athletes train their brains. Baseball players, my God, right? The kind of reflexes these guys have, and the way that they train their brains to respond to the empirical data that's coming in at them, like, a million miles a minute. I don't know if it's coming that fast, but they have to their brain has to make really interesting calculations very, very quickly, and they've trained their brains to do that. So they've trained their brains to be reliable under certain stressful empirical conditions, right? So we can do that. Every day we have, we just take it for granted that we're doing this. But we also take it for granted that we do this in the moral domain. We do morality the same way we do everything else, right? So why do you think we argue so much about whether something is right or wrong? We do this, right? So we also take it for granted that the moral facts we rely on in our daily activities are objectively true. We do the same thing with morality that we do with empirical data. Why do we do that? Well, the conclusion here that I've put down that follows from these premises is it is very likely that we treat moral facts as objectively true because we are confident in our ability to detect moral facts. Now, again, this is not about the truth of objectivism. This is an argument for objectivism based on how we are treating moral facts. We treat them as if they are objectively true. If we didn't, we wouldn't be so hot and bothered about things. We wouldn't be arguing with people about whether or not racism is wrong and what we should do about misogyny and all of the social injustices, whether transphobia is a bad thing, right? Whether homophobia is a bad thing. All the phobias, all the isms that you can think of. We're constantly bickering about these things. And we believe that there's the answer to that. We treat moral facts as if they are objectively true. So I'm drawing an analogy. This argument is basically, like I said, it's an argument from analogy. I'm drawing an analogy between the way that we do that with empirical facts and the way we do this with moral facts. And because we have a way of knowing that whether or not we are accurate empirically, we might also develop a way of knowing whether we're accurate morally. We'll get to that. Okay? So this is just a very simple argument from analogy saying, look, we treat these the same way. Clearly we're confident. If we're this confident, then it's possible that we're confident for a good reason, right? Maybe we do have a moral faculty that can detect as some kind of moral faculty. Now, I'm not saying that we have some special supernatural thing. I'm thinking more like we have the ability to engage in the proper sort of moral inquiry and dialogue with one another and use reasoning to come to moral truths, right? So we have that capacity, and we're confident of that capacity. Okay. What time is it? God, this lecture is going to go just as long as the other one. I'm so sorry. It's because you had to sit and listen to me talk about silly things and watch me drink wine. I'm going to drink some more. Okay. Good. Great. What's this other page? Okay, so moral objectivists are committed to the idea, this is the next page, moral objectivists are committed to the idea that we have the ability to detect moral facts in a way that is reliable. And it's going to be as reliable, it would be nice if it was as reliable as the way in which we detect empirical facts. We know that certain processes of reasoning are very reliable. So if we use those processes of reasoning in our moral inquiry, we're likely to be fairly reliable in our moral judgments. Okay? So I'm just giving a little bit of it. I'm just running through the outline here where I give a little bit of explanation for why I think the premises are good premises. Because I said so. I would never do that. That's evil. That's not philosophical. You never just say because I said so. This is all stuff I just said. Okay. Objection to this argument. Now, why might somebody think that this argument is not a good argument? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Because it's an argument from analogy, I'm drawing an analogy between the way we treat empirical data and the way we treat moral data. Okay, so I'm drawing an analogy between these two things. I'm saying we're really confident of this, and as it turns out, we're pretty justified because science, has shown us that under certain conditions, we're really reliable. I'm saying, oh, look, we can probably treat our confidence in our moral judgments the same way as we treat our confidence in our empirical judgments, even though we don't yet have something like a science of morality that can tell us exactly how reliable those judgments are. We do have processes of reasoning. We have other kinds of reliable methodology, right? But one of the objections here is the major objection to this argument is going to be that the first premise is true because we've been able to verify our ability to detect empirical facts, and we've been able to do that with science. Science has given us good evidence of how reliable our sensory information is. It's pretty damn reliable under certain conditions. There is a disanalogy between the empirical domain and the moral domain. So somebody's just going to say, look, you can't draw that analogy. Because there's nothing equivalent to science in the moral domain. We really don't know how to verify our moral sensitivities, right? Okay. And the fact that there's a lot of moral disagreement. Okay, so this is part of this objection, although it could be leveled as a second objection. The fact that there is a lot of moral disagreement in the world suggests that we might not be very good at detecting the moral facts, right? So if objectivism is true, and there's just one set of moral truths out there, and remember, a true claim is just a fact, so moral facts, we might not be very good at detecting that because we bicker all the time. Everybody disagrees all the time. If we were really good at detecting that, wouldn't it be a little bit more like us just walking down the street and getting that empirical data and just being able to, navigate the world very, very successfully? That's an interesting question. What would be equivalent to a science of morality? Like, we have science for empirical stuff, but what would be equivalent to a science of morality? It's difficult to say. So this is not an objection that tells us that objectivism is necessarily false, but it is a problem that objectivists have to think about. We have to consider, how do we solve this problem? In fact, I'm writing a graduate thesis or my PhD thesis on something that helps sort of address this issue, right? But it's a big project. Okay, good. So that's objectivism. The other two won't take nearly as long because they're not as interesting. I'm a little bit biased. I think objectivism is a really interesting theory. I think there's something to it. So, okay. Subjectivism is a goat roping. Subjectivism is the biggest crock of crap on the planet. But we're going to talk about it because it's in the book. No philosopher defends. Well, they might defend a really sophisticated version of this, but not like a simple version of subjectivism. Okay, so again, let's refresh ourselves with some wine. I'm just wondering if I am. I'm getting like a wine mustache, like a Kool-Aid mustache. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. There are a lot of people out there who are not objectivists who would be like, yes, you are indeed drinking the Kool-Aid, sweetie, if you think objectivism is true. And to them, I say, fight me. Okay. Subjectivism. All right. Moral claims are subjectively true. Okay, so in other words, again, this is a repeat. They just depend on what an individual wants, thinks, desires, whatever. If I want it to be true that torturing puppies is morally bad, then it is. And what I'm saying is true because I want it to be true. That just seems really fucked up, right? Because it is. Okay, so implications of this view. Now, this is where shit gets really crazy when you think of what does this view imply? Well, it implies that there's no single set of moral claims, right? That is true for all people at all places at all times. Moral claims can only be true for individuals at specific times and specific places. So today, this entails that today I could think that, I don't know, let's stop talking about torturing puppies. Let's go on with something else, right? Let's be creative. Punching Nazis. I would like to punch Nazis. Okay, so punching Nazis. I always have to pick something contentious. Nobody thinks torturing puppies is a contentious issue, but everybody is going to have an opinion about whether or not it's okay to punch Nazis. All right, suppose that yesterday I believed it was okay to punch Nazis, and I was out there punching Nazis. Okay? That would be such a great workout. But then today I'm like, well, no, actually I've decided that punching Nazis is wrong. I was correct yesterday, and I am correct today. Even though it looks like I'm contradicting myself, according to subjectivism, it's like, no, it's whatever you feel like in the moment. So that's interesting. So in both instances, my claim is true. What I said yesterday, punching Nazis is wrong, was true, and then, or punching Nazis is morally acceptable is true, and then today, no, punching Nazis is wrong, that's also true. That just seems really inconsistent. Well, because it is, because there is no objective fact of the matter for the subjectivist. There isn't. It's whatever you feel like in the moment. Can anybody see anything that might be a little bit problematic with this view? Well, if you say that doesn't look like a moral view at all, then you would be correct. It doesn't look like a moral view at all. Because morality is a type of social norm. Social norms, the function of social norms is to keep order in society, some kind of order in society. But if we don't agree on what's morally correct, ever, we don't have to, then is this really morality that we're talking about here, right? So I think the book uses this example, I could be standing in line at Starbucks to get my hoity-toity fancy shit, which I don't drink, by the way. I can't afford to buy that shit, so I just don't. And if I ever get a Starbucks card, I'm like, oh man, I got a $20. My parents are always giving me these things, right? Because people give them to them and they don't ever leave the house because they're old and retired and whatever. So they just hand them to me. Like every time I visit them, they're like, here's a pile of Starbucks cards. I'm like, this is great. I just can get a coffee refill like all year. And that's all I do. I don't spend it on the expensive stuff. This is what happens when you grow up poor. You're like, this is fantastic. It's going to take me 2 years to spend $20 at Starbucks. Okay, but suppose I'm waiting in line at Starbucks. I'm feeling really good right now, and I haven't even had a full glass of wine. I am such a lightweight. Okay, so I'm standing in line at Starbucks, and somebody cuts in front of me, and I'm like, hey, That's not fair. Fairness is a moral issue, right? That's not fair. You just cut in front of me. I've been waiting here for like since 5 o'clock this morning. You just run in and you like jump in front of me. And the person has to say, well, I'm sorry. It's morally acceptable for me to do this. You have no right to criticize me. And you don't. If subjectivism is true, you have to just be like, okay, yes, sir. Beat me and call me Susan. You know, screw me over. That seems like a recipe for chaos. Okay. So if people disagree about a moral claim, none of them's wrong. Everybody's right. This is just like so. This is the kind of thing you would expect to find in a stoner colony, you know, where everybody's just getting stoned all the time. We're like, dude, you do you, and you're awesome no matter what, even if you're flaying puppies alive. I don't know any stoners who would be okay with that. It sounds like I know a lot of stoners. It sounds like I know a lot of stoners. I do, actually. I really could use another sip of my wine. This shitty day just got better. Okay. So you can't criticize people. You can't debate about what's right or wrong. You have to just accept what people do to you. If somebody's like, well, look, I think it's okay to murder, and they pull out a gun and they blow your mom's head off right in front of you, or your kids, or your dog, you have to just be like, oh, okay. That's fine. I'm so glad you're doing what you find morally correct. It must be nice for you. Congratulations. I mean, what kind of fucking society is that? I'm not a retributive kind of person, but I'm sorry. I'm not just going to be like, oh, yes, that's fine. Why don't you just shoot my child? I'm okay with that since you find it morally acceptable. None of us really feel that way. The only time people claim to be moral subjectivists is when they want you to get off their backs about something. They're like, oh, well, I think it's okay. It's like, fuck you, dude. You're wrong. Okay. All right. So we have an argument for subjectivism. Now, this is not, I don't believe that this is in the book either. They didn't provide an argument for objectivism, and they didn't provide an argument for subjectivism because they think objectivism is just obviously true. Subjectivism is just obviously false. Well, they're not being good philosophers. So I provided an argument for subjectivism because I'm a good teacher. I need to tell myself this today. I need to believe I'm good at something. Okay. Subjectivism. It's not clear that anyone actually defends this view in its simplest form. I mean, not any philosopher. There might be some dum-dum out there who just wants to believe that whatever they do is okay. They might be some privileged white boy, you know, who just thinks whatever I do is morally acceptable because I'm privileged, right? But it's not clear that anybody who actually does this for a living would waste their time defending this simple view. So I tried to be as charitable as possible in constructing this argument, but it's still kind of a shit argument because the view is shit, right? So premise one, the act of valuing something is purely subjective. That is, it depends on what a given person thinks, desires, believes, feels about that thing. All right. So maybe I value torturing babies. Okay. There's something wrong with me. There is something fundamentally wrong with me. I value torturing babies. Okay, so, but if you think that the act of valuing is purely subjective, it just depends on what you want, and what you think, and what you feel. If I feel like torturing babies is okay, then it's okay. That's a subjective value. Morality is grounded in valuing. Now, there are theories. We'll get to them in chapters 6 and 7. There are theories that say morality is grounded in a type of value. So you could make that kind of an argument here. So the act of valuing something is purely subjective. Morality is grounded in valuing. So the conclusion is morality is purely subjective. It's a very simple argument. It is an argument for subjectivism. Where you would probably want to take issue with this argument, come on, computer, cooperate. What did I say? I'm reading what I said because I can't remember. Okay, this is a really simple argument, but not necessarily a bad argument. There's lots of psychological evidence for premise 1. People value a wide range of things, and it seems like what we value is tied as much to our individual personalities as it is to where and how we grew up. Okay, so I'm being really charitable here. Studies of adopted children have highlighted some of these findings, okay? However, I know I came up with a decent objection here somewhere. However, in spite of the variation in what people value, there is also a lot of overlap. This overlap could be evidence that some types of value are universal, right? So it might be that there are just some things that are objectively valuable, like human life, right? It doesn't really depend on what you think. If you don't think human life is valuable, too bad for you. Human life just is valuable, okay? So there might be, given that there's overlap in what we tend to value, that seems to count as evidence that there is something that is objectively valuable, right? Like pleasure. Everybody values pleasure because pleasure is valuable. Happiness, valuable, right? Human life. Not everybody agrees that human life is intrinsically valuable, but a lot of people do, right? So there's a lot of overlap. Morality is grounded in valuing. That requires some substantive commitments to a specific moral theory. So, objections to this argument. Next page. Oh, God, I'm going to run over an hour. I'm so sorry. You're trapped here with me. So, objections. The easiest objection to this argument is to say that premise 2 is false. The best objection to this argument, however, okay, so that's the easiest objection, but the best objection is to say that premise 1 is false. Okay, so you can say that morality is not grounded in valuing, but there are some pretty sophisticated moral theories that say it is, and you would have to create a whole bunch of objections to that moral theory, and that's not going to be that's going to take some time. But the best objection is to say that premise 1 is false. Premise 1 is just that the act of valuing is purely subjective. Okay. There is too much evidence that there are things that people universally value. Love, relationships, family, right? So there's at least one type of value that is not purely subjective. So if there's at least one thing that is objectively valuable, that's all we need to falsify premise 2. And I think it's pretty clear that there's substantial evidence that there are things that people universally value. So, another objection, and I already brought this up, subjectivism was bring chaos. You would never be able to know how you would never be able to trust. If you didn't have some idea of what people found morally objectionable, and the moral principles that they were willing to accept as true, you wouldn't be able to trust them. We would never have the ability to trust our fellow human beings. And society is built on a certain level of trust, right? So it seems like if subjectivism was true and everybody acted like it were true, then we would have social chaos. But we don't. We don't. So everybody behaves as if objectivism is true. Whether or not it is true is another story, but we do behave that way. All right, finally, we are at relativism. And the sun has gone down and my lighting has gotten really weird. Let me see if I can make this look a little bit less like, this is just, okay, let's just talk about relativism. I don't care what I look like. It's the wine talking. No, it's not. I really don't care what I look like. Just a little bit. I can't drink a whole bottle of wine. It'd be really sick. Okay, relativism. Now, there are a lot of people who actually who don't study philosophy, who, oh God, my screen's even, I'm obviously still a little bit inept. Even though I have a new light, I still have retarded computer skills. Oh, I am stupid. I use the R word. I am so sorry. I have stupid computer skills. Okay, relativism. God. Using the R word is bad. It's morally objectionable because it is oppressive. I am absolutely sorry that I said that. Okay, relativism. This is an R word. Let me tell you what relativism is an R word. All right, no philosopher defends this view, but a lot of people think this must be true. Okay, so here is the argument for relativism, and it's actually provided by the authors of the book. It's the only argument they provided in this chapter. Premise 1, the important moral value of tolerance requires that we respect the beliefs and practices of other societies. This is actually called the principle of tolerance. Premise 2, relativism rules out the possibility of judging any particular society's standards to be better or worse than others. Okay, so that means that what we do here in the United States is no better or worse, morally speaking, than what Nazi Germany did. Let that sink in. We're no better or worse than Nazi Germany. At least we don't have a right to say so, according to relativism. Because tolerance, we're tolerating other people's, we're respecting other people's beliefs and practices. Okay. Premise 3. Judging a group's moral beliefs and practices is not compatible with respecting the beliefs and practices of other societies. We must respect them even if they are putting people in gas chambers and torturing babies and cutting off their hair and making rope out of it and shooting them and putting them in mass graves, starving them to death, working them to death. Generally just degrading humanity in every form possible. We can't judge that. It's okay. Sorry, I really despise relativism, and every philosopher I know also despises relativism. So, all right, so the conclusion is we ought to embrace relativism as the best moral view. There is one devastating objection to this argument, and I love that it has one devastating objection. There are at least two, but the one that I love is this, that the first premise is self-refuting. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about this. The principle of tolerance, which is the first premise, is a moral principle. It states that it is a moral value. It's a moral principle. So the principle of tolerance is a moral principle. If it's a moral principle, what makes it true? So what we're talking about with these three different categories of theories is what makes moral claims true? Well, what makes it true, according to the subjectivist, is that you just want it to be true, so it is. What makes it true, according to the objectivist, is that there is some state of affairs in the world is what makes it true. But that doesn't depend on whether you want it to be true or not. It just is, right? It's like more like empirical facts. Well, the relativist is going to say, well, the principle of tolerance is a moral principle. But I'm not going to tell you how that moral principle is true or false, because I'm being sneaky. And I'm being sneaky because in order for that moral principle to be true at all times, in all places, for all people, objectivism has to be true. I'm sorry, I love it. It's like playing a game and you're like, my team wins. I'm on the winning team. And we didn't cheat. But we didn't cheat. It's great. I'm on the winning team and we didn't cheat. So, let me try to explain this in case it's not entirely obvious to you how that is self-refuting. In order for the conclusion of this argument for relativism to follow, the principle of tolerance, which is the first premise, it must be true, because your premises must be true to provide evidence for the truth of your conclusion, right? So, in order for the conclusion to follow, the principle must be true for all societies at all times in all places. In other words, it must be objectively true. So there's at least one moral principle that's objectively true. And that just undermines relativism at its core. Okay, so, but since it's a moral principle, that would make objectivism true, right? I have this all written down here. I'm just reading it. It seems kind of sketchy to argue that relativism is the best moral view when you have to rely on objectivism to get that conclusion, right? So here's how it's actually self-refuting. For premise one to be, how do we put this? Well, just leave it at that. It's another way of putting it, but you have to phrase the premise differently, and I don't really feel like doing that right now. So it is just a devastating objection, though. I mean, the only way that you can get this argument to go through is if objectivism is true. So you can't argue for relativism if you have to assume that objectivism is true to get relative. It's crap. This is why no philosopher defends this view. So if anybody ever says to you, look, we can't judge other societies, their moral standards are their moral standards, and our moral standards are our moral standards, you can be like, that is just false. Okay? So you don't have to accept that. You can say, look, here's a problem. The principle of tolerance. It can't be true unless objectivism is true. I should do every fucking lecture drinking wine. This is the first time I've ever done it, and so far it's amazing. I mean, maybe it looks different on your end. It feels great on my end. I feel like throwing my glass down, except I already broke one of these wine glasses, and now I only have 3. Oh, fuck my life. And they're blue. I don't know if you can tell, but they're funky, wonderful blue, and I'll never be able to replace the wine. It's so annoying. Okay. Now what? You can follow along on your outline because I'm clever like that. I made this available to you. Isn't I a good teacher? I really needed this today. I did. Okay, so subjectivism doesn't seem to satisfy the conditions for being a moral theory at all, and relativism is self-refuting. It claims there's no such thing as objectivism, but it relies on objectivism to be true. So this leaves us with objectivism. And the authors just assume that that's true, and they're probably really quite justified in doing that. Okay, so this has been our shit show of the week about relativism, subjectivism, and objectivism. Some of you might be wondering if there's other types of isms, and there are, but I'm not going to get into them because they're not really relevant to what we're going to discuss in this class. So that's it. I'm going to finish this glass of wine. And I'm going to enjoy the rest of my evening, I hope. It's actually more fun when I'm like mucking it up on video. And if you have questions, email me or put your questions in the journal. I activated the journal feature on the website, so you can do that too. I check those as frequently as I check my emails. So